this is my might be my last Wittgenstein video for a long time, because it's based off my last paper I wrote, and I have to point out that I'm not as good at philosophy as a lot of my other classmates, and this is probably one of the most mentally challenging papers I've ever done. It ended up being 18 pages. It was only supposed to be 12, but I did 18. And I also did this like a month ago, and it was probably the most mentally challenging. So sorry if this doesn't make any sense, and if I don't explain it well. And if you know about Wittgenstein during 1930 and 1932 and his Verificationism, sorry if I get it wrong. And I have my notes here. I didn't do that much notes. I only did, I don't know, like 13 pages of notes on one of these. But anyway, this is about Wittgenstein versus Schlick, who's a Vienna Circle guy, Maurice Schlick. He was a famous guy in the Vienna Circle who got killed. He believed in Verificationism, which Carnap and Neurath pointed out don't believe in it. This is important because they're both within the same group, the Vienna Circle. And this is about Wittgenstein's attempt to save Schlick's Verificationism, but eventually Wittgenstein drops verification. He makes a very good attempt, though, I think, to save it. But for one, Schlick's verificationism relied on logical atomism. Before I get into that, let me just try to structure what Schlick's verificationism looked like. Basically, sentences have verification conditions. The rock is falling. Those have the X is falling. It's a verification condition. And when I experience it in the world, when I experience a rock falling, I have a feeling, a psychological feeling of contentment that I have figured out that the rock is falling, for I have seen it, and I have the satisfaction of verifying the sentence. And the logical atomism, which by this time Wittgenstein gave up, which if you've read the Tractatus, which is over there somewhere, Wittgenstein was really big in the logical atomism back then. And how it plays into here is the idea is that the verification conditions make up atomistic names. They make up simple names. So the rock is a simple object, and these relate to simple parts in the real world, the actual rock. That's how it works. Sentences have atomistic parts, and the world has atomistic parts, and then there's some kind of relation. Now, the nature of this relation is very up for grabs. Well, not for grabs. It's very debatable. That's where things get kind of screwy. The thing is, it's screwy from the start, logical atomism, but that's not the main focus of this paper. So yeah, just to check the time. I remember to delete the last video. Good. There were 5 problems with Schlick. This paper starts in Schlick, and then Wittgenstein's later. So the 5 problems with Schlick's verification is the problem of the nature of the verification relation, the identifying fact problem, the certainty problem, the momentary nature problem, and the private character problem. The verification relation problem has to do with how exactly can a proposition, the rock is falling, which has logical characteristics, relate to an actual rock falling, which doesn't have logical characteristics. How does this relationship even happen within verificationism? The identifying fact problem is basically one of why do we even need it in the first place, or rather, how do we even get this started? Because it seems like you have to be able to identify that there is a rock falling before you're able to make the proposition that there's a rock falling in the first place, in order to get the conditions together to find it out. That one might be a little fuzzy then that reminds me, and I should have mentioned it. The article is called Wittgenstein on Verification and CNS, 1930-1932 by Andras Blank, Germany. The journal is called Inquiry. So yeah, that's the problem. And the certainty problem is there are no propositions are above doubt, but the verification relation of Schlick seems to say that once you have this feeling of contentment that you now have verified the proposition, then it's absolutely true. But this can't be. There is always doubt. The fourth one, the problem of the momentary nature of this is basically when you have a feeling of contentment that you verified it. The problem is that this happens once. You feel it and then bam, contentment. What about afterwards, after you have the feeling? Now the problem is it doesn't seem like propositions can be very stable if they're all based on these momentary verification feelings. The last one is the problem of the private character. This feeling of contentment I have when verifying the propositions is, well, it's private. And the problem with private feelings is that they can't be readily explained to other people very well. That's the problem for Schlick. Let me try to go from memory here what he said each of these. When it comes to the certainty problem, he came up with this thing. It's a German word. I think it's Konstatierung. I think that's how it's pronounced. I'm going to spell it down in the description, and you can tell me if that's how you spell it, how you pronounce it. Konstatierung. I'm going to call them KRs for now. He said, "Aha! But I found a type of proposition that is beyond doubt." One problem, though, is that it's a very specific type of proposition, and that was my worry. The paper didn't mention it, but it's like, of all the propositions in the world, very small amounts of them are Konstatierungs. For one, Konstatierung is basically something like, here is water, or I need something more simple than that. Let me take this. Okay, here. Here is red. The thing is you can't write down a Konstatierung, because if I wrote down here is red, when you read the paper, when you read the sentence, you can't see here is red, and here has already happened. That's why if you give a place here now is red, you can't write it down because it's already happened. And the thing with Konstatierungs is that it's not a matter of here's a proposition and then we relate it to the outside world. These are sort of immediate propositions that are immediately true. I immediately see and say when I make the proposition and when I see it, it's an immediate at the same time proposition of here is red. That's his sort of comeback. Is the Konstatierung. So yeah, that's the thing. A Konstatierung proposition, unlike other propositions, don't have independent meanings. Like if I say, I drink water. That wasn't supposed to, I was thirsty. But if I just say I drink water, that has a meaning on its own. But this, it's instantaneous reaction to sense of seeing red. There's no meaning beyond it. That's his how to deal with it. So, yeah, the reality constitutes the meaning. That's what Schlick said. Yeah, and they themselves can create hypotheses, scientific hypotheses. Instead, if they come before hypothesizing, then they're not worth much, but they can act as hypotheses by which we can use them to, verify things later on. We can use this to fulfill that feeling that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, the problem is that this is still a momentary feeling. We momentarily feel the thing, and then there we go. We don't constantly are able to verify it because we've only verified it once. But Schlick's idea is he doesn't have a problem with the momentary nature at all, because he says once you verified it once, it's good for that proposition's good forever. You only need to verify it once, and you seem like you can only do it with constant derivatives. So with constant derivatives, you can verify it, and then there you go. Okay, I'm not going to call him KDR. Constant derivatives is kind of cool to say. It's German. Yeah, and then now he says, are the verification conditions themselves independent of language? He says, no, something's only a fact if it can be described in a grammatical position. Yeah, and then there's the private problem. Our understanding of the Constatarugan words and propositions come from our private experience, immediate experience of this is red. If you're curious, this was on my old car. It got broken off anyway. So this thing is red. Problem is, it's still my immediate experience and verification of this being red is still private. The actual feeling of verification, and it's still very difficult to actually express this to other people. And if you can't express it, how can you prove it? It still seems too subjective. I don't like that word subjective. It still seems unprovable or nonsensical because of how private, how deeply private the character of it is. So, Wittgenstein time. Sorry if I pause a lot. This is hard stuff, and I'm going to have to look at my notes a lot. So just bear with me here. I like to think that if most of you are into Wittgenstein, you're willing to deal with hardships to understand it, because it's very hard. So Wittgenstein modified this in two ways, according to the Dr. Blank, the guy who wrote this article. This is based off an article I read, if you haven't caught on. He said that he changed it in two ways. One, he said that the verification conditions did not constitute the entire meaning of the propositions. Because understand that with Schlick, the verification conditions, that was all there was. That was the entire meaning. But Wittgenstein was like, no, wait, what about, logical connectors and, or that, prepositions, I guess, would be logical connectors. But mainly things like and or, and if connectors, those logical connectors. So if you've taken logic, that would be like your arrows, your horseshoes, your wedges, your tribars, what else is there? And ampersands or dots, depending on because different systems use different things. Some use ampersands, some use dots, etc. Those also constitute the meaning of the proposition. This is very important, mainly because Schlick was just too absolute in his idea of what constitutes the meaning of proposition, to the point where he didn't let the wedge room. It's not really wedge room either. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, there's more to it than that. The second way he changed it is the fiction problem. The problem with Schlick is that he said that this is how you get your meaning. You get the Constatarugan hypothesis and its verification relation is how words get meaning. But the problem is, what about fiction or theoretical stuff? Like what about Lord of the Rings? Like, what about the proposition, the orcs live over there in Orktown? We can't, there's verification conditions there, but we can never, verify those conditions, because there's no orcs and there's no Orktown. Well, there might be an Orktown, like some language other than English. But, yeah, you can't verify those conditions. But it's still a meaningful, sentence. Oh, I forgot to mention that Schlick also believed that if it's theoretically possible to verify a proposition by actually going out and looking at it, then it's meaningful. But you can't really go out and look at an orc. So that's sort of a problem. You can't What about the fictional theoretical senses? They are still, you can't verify them to your senses in any way, not even theoretically, but they are still good propositions. And Wittgenstein says one way they are meaningful is that there are propositions which are meaningful, and we simply, by comparison to the meaningful propositions, we can construct theoretical and fictional ones. So in a way we can still get meaningful fictional ones with Wittgenstein verificationism as opposed to the Schlickian one. Another thing that's very important is that Wittgenstein's version of verification didn't have that feeling. There was nothing psychological about Wittgenstein. Schlick was an entirely psychological type of verificationism. You verify through the psychological feeling of contentment. There's none of that in Wittgenstein. In fact, Wittgenstein made an argument against an argument that Russell made that sounded very much like what Schlick said, and I really wish I had the quote in front of me. I don't want to pause. I'm not going to have to edit this video to like shut the video down and get it back. Anyway, it was something like, if I'm hungry, I have this creates the desire to be not hungry. So like an earlier proposition in a Schlick's verification is, I am hungry creates the desire to verify this relation by seeing if you're hungry or not. So like, if you verify, whatever verifies it. So the problem is with Russell's thing is like, if I'm hungry, this creates a desire and expectation of food, so I'll eat because I have the desire to not be hungry, and whatever creates this desire of not being hungriness verifies the hungriness in a way. The problem is, what if he gets punched in the stomach? Does that verify the hunger? Basically, to put it in non-confusing terms, because I'm not reading the quote directly, and I'm going to try to link it down there in the description. The problem with the verification relation is of Schlick is, what if the thing that's verifying your statement is crap? Like it's not logical. Like what if the proposition the rock is falling? That's what I used throughout my paper. And what if you think you see a rock falling and then you feel, oh, see, I was right, the rock is falling. So if you say the rock is falling, and then you see the rock falling, what if it was not a rock? Or what if you were on drugs? Or what if in some way you were tricked to where it wasn't really a rock falling? So the thing which verified your proposition, is not, it doesn't make any logical sense. It's not a logical multiplicity, which some will get in later. It's not one of the things that the proposition implies will verify it to be true or false. So like, think like magic tricks can confuse the verification relation. The magic tricks can confuse what it is that makes you feel verified in your proposition. Things which can cause a verification relation. Things can cause a verification relation which doesn't prove crap, really. Illusions and stuff. That was my take from the Russell thing mentioned in this article. I'll try to post the link to the article. The problem though is I think you have to be a college student to be able to read it. You have to type in I had to type in my student ID and password to look at it, to print it off. Yeah, that's the problem with that. But then there's Wittgenstein replaces that with a logical relation rather than a psychological one. Two concepts are important here. I'm going to talk about the two concepts, and I'm going to talk about the way that Wittgenstein doesn't follow the 5 problems I mentioned earlier, and I might have to do a part 2 because this video is going to be long, because this paper was like 18-page paper. So yeah, the multiplicity, he got it from Helmholtz, this scientist bloke. He said that we live in a threefold multiplicity. Things on paper live in a twofold multiplicity. Stuff like that. So how it works is that propositions have logical multiplicities in them. So there's no logical atomism in Wittgenstein, by the way, I have to point out again. So in that sentence I keep using, the rock is falling, the logical multiplicities would be like, there's a rock but it isn't falling, or there is a thing that's falling but it's not a rock, or there's a rock but it can't fall. Everything that you can all logical outcomes that you can imagine based on this proposition. This is where knowing intralogic would help. If you know intralogic, think truth trees. A truth tree is something like, if A then B, and then the truth, not a truth tree, sorry, not everyone uses that, we use truth tables. But a truth tree or truth table, whatever you use, we usually use truth tables in my college. Some people use trees. They're kind of the same, but truth tables make more sense. But the truth table basically points out all the conditions of true and false. So all the combinations of A and B being true and false, and if A then B. So that's all the logical multiplicities. That's all the possible outcomes. So it could be the case that A isn't real, or B isn't real, or they're both real, or one is it, one not, whatever. That's the multiplicity. So in the rock of fall, so I'll go with an easier one. I can walk. The multiplicity is there to be I can or I can't. I thought the example in the book is like pitches and knobbies on stereos, like the logical multiplicity.